In this recording, I'm going to show you quite a few things, including how to start a new file, which will be important when you start editing these images and preparing them for the project itself, how to save a project, and then also we'll look at a couple of different issues dealing with selecting, including inverse selections and also how to move the object around once you separate it from the background. So let's first just start a new file, and we'll come back to that and we'll actually put our object on that new file later on in the video. So up at the top at Photoshop, you see you have this bar here, and if you go to File and New, a dialog box will come up with lots of different options for you. Yours might look different from this just depending on what the settings are on the particular computer that you're using. So you have some preset options here, including lots of different kind of default options. There's a couple that I've set for myself for my own purposes. For this project, you'll want to just choose the US paper option, and that'll change the size to letter, which is 8.5 by 11. This might be an area where each of you has a different set of measurements depending on how you're going to go about approaching this. So if you want the image to be wide and not tall, you might choose to make the width 11 and the height 8.5. If it's not in inches, you just simply click on this drop down box and you see it has lots of options for you there, so you can just put it on inches there. And then a really important part when we're in Photoshop is that you want to be absolutely certain that your resolution is high so that when we print these, they'll be crisp and clear. Sometimes if you have that resolution set low, you might not realize it till much later in the project, and then your print is going to be blurry and there's really nothing you can do about it. So resolution, you can see, is pixels per inch, and basically sometimes that's called DPI also. You'll see it set as that. So that just tells you what the clarity of the image is and how many little pixels or little blocks in Photoshop there are per inch of your document. A solid amount for our purposes is 300. So when you set up your document, you want to be certain that it's 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 8.5, and that it is a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. And then the rest of it, you can be sure, sort of looks like this. It usually defaults to these RGB settings and background settings, but take a look at these and that's fine. I usually don't mess with those. I just leave them at what they're at here. So once you get that set, you can hit OK. And you'll get a new blank document that's 11 inches wide and 8.5 inches tall. If I go up to the top here to View and I click on Rulers, you'll see that I'll get some rulers here, which sometimes for me is helpful just to visualize what actually is happening on the screen. Sometimes it's hard to understand what that looks like in real life when you'll print it out. So now we have a document that is 11 by 8.5, and it's basically a blank sheet for us to work on, which is great. So each of your steps of this project will have its own 8.5 by 11 inch document that you'll have, and you'll eventually print all of those out. One very important thing is that you want to save your documents regularly while you're working. So I'm going to go ahead and just set this up to save it. I've opened it, but it's not actually saved anywhere. So I'll go to File and Save As. And I'm just going to name this Orange because I have an image of an orange that I'll move on to here to show you in a minute. Some important things to pay attention to here is that I want you to be sure that you're saving it as a Photoshop file. And this will become really important later when you're working in layers because it will keep those layers present. And then you also have to pay attention to where you're saving that file. A lot of times students will just hit save and then they won't be able to find their file. So pay attention to that. If you click on desktop, it will obviously save it to the desktop. For some of you, you might have your flash drive plugged in, and if you sort of push the mouse down and scroll down to the bottom, your flash drive may show up somewhere over here, so you could click on that and save it to the flash drive. So name it something that you can remember. Make sure it's a Photoshop file. That's the first one on the list here. And then just go ahead and save it. And from then on out, while you're working, you can just simply hit Command S to continually sort of save the changes that you've made along the way. Let's go back to this other file here. You can see if I have multiple files open, there are tabs up at the top. So I'm just clicking on those to open that other file. You can also click on a tab and drag it down, and you'll see it has it in a separate window. I can also just drag that back to put it back into the tab lineup here. So here we have an orange, and I wanted to put this on here as an example because the previous example showed you how we were working with something that was in a more complex environment. And so some of you might have images that have a more simple background, which is great, and you may just be extracting an object from that. So I thought I would show you something on a white background just as an example, and then show you another trick that might work. So one thing I didn't talk about in those other videos was the fact that what we were doing in those was basically selecting the background and erasing it as a way to isolate just that single object. Another way to go about that is that you might just want to select the object itself and then move it out of that environment rather than taking the time to erase the background. So it doesn't really matter how you do it. Some people have a preference for one, versus another. So I'm going to go over here and select this. Let's do the lasso tool, or let's actually do the quick selection tool. So I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to start in the middle of the orange because I actually want to select the orange itself. So I'm going to just drag that around. And you can see that the quick selection tool pretty quickly just picks that orange and knows that that's what I want to do. So right now I'm selecting the orange. If I go over here to the move tool, which is this tool up at the very top, and I click on my selection, you can see now that I can move that orange around. It's revealing this checkerboard pattern in the back, which means it's transparent. And I can move that orange around the page if I like. What I'd like to do is go ahead and just delete that white background because I don't need it. I just want the orange itself. So a nice trick in Photoshop is that I can go up here to where it says select and select inverse. And really quickly what you can see what happens is that before, I'll step back quickly so you can see, and I'm stepping back by just hitting Command Z. So you can see that the marching ants are just around the orange itself. But watch when I go to select and I select inverse. Can you see how the marching ants are now on the outside and they're here? And what that means is that it's selecting the background. It's selecting the opposite of what I had selected before. So now if I hit delete, you can see that it just gets rid of that background. So now all I have is this orange just isolated on the page. So it's really up to you whether it makes more sense to select the background or to select the object. And there's really a lot of different situations that you'll end up in where one seems like a better idea, than the other does. So what I want to do now is I want to take this and I want to move it to my brand new document. And so we'll just get to that step and then I'll stop the video there. So what you can do is you can do a couple of things. You can go up to Edit and, you can go up to Select. And you can select all because we want the orange and that's everything on there. And I can go up to Edit and I can copy that. You'll see that the shortcuts are listed right next to all of these functions that happen in Photoshop. As you get better at Photoshop, you should just start to remember those because it makes your life a lot easier. So if I wanted to select all, for instance, rather than going up to select, select all, I could also just simply hit Command A. So I'm going to go up to Edit, and I'm going to copy. And now I'm going to go to that new document that I made for the orange, and it's 8.5 by 11. And I'm going to go up to Edit and Paste. I can also hit just Command V. And you'll see that it pastes that orange right here on my new document. Also notice that it puts it on a new layer. We'll talk about layers in a later video. And it pastes it right onto that page. And that's perfect. That's right where I want it. I'm going to step back one step, and I'm going to show you another way that you can do this. If I drag this tab down, like I showed before, you can see that I have this floating window of that document, and it's next to this one. Let me move this out of the way so you can see. I can also, with the Move tool selected, click on the orange, and I can actually just move it over to that other document, and you can see it shows up there. I'll show you one more thing. Put that back up in the tabs here. I can do that same thing. Choose the Move tool, grab the orange. I can just go up to this tab here and drop it down. So there's a lot of different ways to move images from one document to another, but basically you can select it, copy it, and paste it. Or you can basically drag it over to that other document. And then I'm going to make sure I'm saving this. So I'm going to hit Save, or I could just simply hit Command S to be sure that that's saved. You'll get this pop-up window, and just go ahead and hit OK with the Maximize Compatibility checked. And now my document is saved, as you can see on the desktop here. It's saved with that orange on it. Okay, we'll stop there for now.